This is a story that's come out now. I don't know if you remember those two lawyers up in New York City. They were fairly young lawyers, but they got wrapped up in one of these George Floyd protests, and they were taking a little bit more action than your standard protesters. So they weren't just marching and holding signs and complaining about whatever they're complaining about, but they were also making Molotov cocktails, distributing them, and then throwing them. And one instance in particular in which they're caught on surveillance footage firebombing a New York Police Department police cruiser. These are a couple of lawyers.
Outside the boundaries of peaceful.
Well,
right?
I don't know. What do you call peaceful, right? I mean, apparently words don't have meaning anymore. And you could just sort of massage words and repurpose them for new purposes. So now a peaceful protest becomes an insurrection, an attempt to overthrow a sitting government in one case, and then in another case, a violent protest where they're firebombing police vehicles. That becomes a peaceful protest, an expression of somebody's rights to freedom of thought and those sorts of things. So you've got a couple of New York City lawyers, and I'll tell you what, the intelligentsia in New York, the intellectuals, all of the finest people in New York, all think it's terrible what's being done to these two. I mean, after all, they only firebombed an empty police cruiser. There was no actual policeman inside. If there was an actual policeman inside, they'd probably give him a medal, right? Because that's the mentality of these folks nowadays. But these two folks, what's so interesting is they've now been set for trial, and the article says, oh, they're going to trial, they're going to trial. Well, they're set for trial in March of next year, and a lot can happen between today and March of next year, including plea negotiations could come to fruition. But what's so interesting to me is these two. I mean, you have to say, if you're willing to throw Molotov cocktails at cars, you could be a danger to the community. I mean, I know we have heard there are hundreds of January 6th protesters being held still in jail since January 6th because they are considered by the courts, by the prosecutors. They make these big arguments. I mean, do you know these people don't believe that the election was fair? They think there was fraud in the last election. Clearly, they're a danger to the community. These are the actual arguments. I'm summarizing them, but go look at the court transcripts. These are the actual arguments that are being made. People are a danger to the community based on their political ideology or their thoughts about a certain incident. They're a danger to the community. Meanwhile, when you've got folks involved in the George Floyd protests like these two highfalutin lawyers up in New York City that firebombed the police car, they are released to their home confinement, what they call home confinement, and the electronic monitoring bracelet, which anybody that's looked into those, I'm not saying these people are slipping out of their ankle monitors, but I am saying that you can look into it, and apparently it's very possible to slip out of those ankle monitors and go do whatever you want, come back and slip them back on. Somehow they don't seem to actually track. Like we all think and we all assume, oh, well, they put these ankle monitors on people, so if they release them to home confinement, we can actually be sure that they're staying at home. They've got to stay at home because they've got these ankle monitors on. And, you know, if you take the ankle monitor off, I mean, surely it's got to alert the authorities, and they've got to come and check on you, right? And apparently, again, I don't know this, but apparently that's not the case. Apparently, folks can get out of these things. Apparently, only if somebody's paying attention at the monitoring center, you know, kind of like the guards at Jeffrey Epstein's cell, only if they're not falling asleep at the moment, are there any actual protections afforded to this? Because apparently you can slip it off and the alert goes off at the monitoring center. But again, if the guard is sleeping, then nobody notices. And you slip it back on and the alert turns off. Anyway, you can go look into the investigative journalism on ankle monitoring and on these sort of supervised release provisions that we have in the law. And you'll find out that they're not as rock solid as they say. So that's what we've got. These two firebombers. I mean, you got to think about the idea of starting a fire in a city. I mean, that would be a capital offense, an offense for which you could be executed. Just think about the Great Fire in Chicago. Think about the fire in San Francisco. We don't face this as much like we used to, but when our cities were largely built out of wood, back in the late 1800s, you would see fires rage through an entire city. And there was a great fire in London. I mean, go back historically, and that one was back, I think, in 1666 in London. But you go back historically, and you see that fires were responsible for destroying entire cities, killing a lot of people. So starting a fire or firebombing something, that's a very serious offense because you could accidentally get a fire started that gets out of control in a city. Now, with the more modern cities built out of concrete, steel, and more fire-resistant materials, that's probably not as big of an issue, but I don't think it's in any universe fair to say that these are nonviolent or that these people are not a potential danger to the community based on the standard they're applying to the January 6 folks. So, but these folks get let out. Is it because of their political persuasion? Is it because they're on the same team as the folks letting them out? Well, I mean, I don't know. You tell me. But it certainly seems like we've got two different standards in this country, doesn't it? Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.